The ball sailed over the defensive line in the 87th minute, and the Bayern striker was through on goal. By the time the final whistle blew and Real Madrid's Champions League dream lay in ruins, the Bernabeu had witnessed something far more devastating than a 3-2 defeat. By the next morning, the Spanish press would dissect every tactical failure. By Tuesday, the dressing room would fracture into factions. But it started with 9 words spoken in fury in the tunnel, words that shattered a mentor-protege bond built over 2 seasons. You can't cover for me anymore because you can't keep up. Don't forget to subscribe to Elite Ball Legends and like the video for your support. Thank you for subscribing. Rüdiger had been Real Madrid's defensive rock since arriving from Chelsea in 2022. At 31 years old, he brought German efficiency, physical intimidation, and a winner's mentality forged in Premier League battles and Champions League triumphs. He was the vocal leader, the organizer, the one who held the defensive line together when chaos threatened. His partnership with Tchouaméni, the 24-year-old French midfielder who could drop between center-backs and shield the defense, had become one of European football's most effective tactical relationships. They worked like clockwork. Rüdiger would step up aggressively to press attackers, trusting Tchouaméni to sweep behind him, covering the space with his exceptional reading of the game and recovery pace. When Rüdiger won the ball high up the pitch, Tchouaméni would already be positioning himself for the transition. When Tchouaméni needed to push forward, Rüdiger would drop deeper, maintaining defensive balance. It was telepathic. It was beautiful. It had carried Real Madrid through La Liga challenges and Champions League knockout rounds with defensive solidity that made Carlo Ancelotti smile. But something had shifted in recent weeks. Rüdiger had felt it in his body first. The half-second delay when turning to chase a forward, the extra yard of space opponents found when they ran at him, the burning in his hamstrings after 90 minutes that used to only come in extra time. At 31, after a decade of elite football across 3 leagues, his body was sending signals he didn't want to acknowledge. The Champions League semi-final against Bayern München was supposed to be Rüdiger's coronation moment. The second leg at the Bernabeu, tied 2-2 from Munich, everything to play for. 80,000 fans creating a wall of sound that had broken so many opponents before. This was the stage where legends were made, where Real Madrid's mystique turned possible defeat into inevitable triumph. The match started perfectly. Real Madrid dominated possession. Vinicius was unplayable down the left wing, tearing through Bayern's defense with pace and trickery. Bellingham orchestrated from midfield with the maturity of a veteran despite his youth. And Rüdiger was everywhere, commanding the defensive line, winning headers, launching attacks with precise long passes. In the 34th minute, Bellingham scored. The Bernabeu erupted. Real Madrid led 1-0 on the night, 3-2 on aggregate. Bayern would need 2 goals. The dream was alive. But Bayern didn't collapse. Thomas Müller, at 35 still causing chaos with intelligent movement, began finding pockets of space between Madrid's midfield and defense. Harry Kane dropped deep, pulling Rüdiger out of position, creating gaps for Bayern's runners. And slowly, methodically, Bayern began to turn the screw. Rüdiger could feel it happening. Each sprint to cover an attacking run felt heavier. Each recovery run back into position took a fraction longer. He was still reading the game brilliantly, still positioning himself correctly, but his body wasn't responding with the sharpness it once did. Tchouaméni noticed. During a break in play in the 58th minute, he jogged over to Rüdiger. "Drop a bit deeper. Let me press higher. You're getting pulled out too much." Rüdiger's jaw tightened. "I know what I'm doing. Just cover the space like we always do." There was an edge to his voice that Tchouaméni recognized, pride mixed with defensiveness. But there was something else too, something that sounded like desperation. In the 71st minute, Bayern equalized. A quick transition, a ball over the top, and Leroy Sané was through. Rüdiger had stepped up to press Kane, trusting Tchouaméni to cover, but Tchouaméni had been dragged wide by Musiala's movement. The space opened. Sané finished clinically. 1-1, aggregate 3-3. The Bernabeu went quiet, not silent, never silent, but the roar became an anxious murmur. Real Madrid needed another goal now. Bayern had away goals in their favor from the first leg. Time was running out. Ancelotti made changes, fresh legs, more attacking intent. Real Madrid pushed forward desperately, leaving space at the back. Rüdiger found himself defending larger areas, making more recovery runs, covering more ground than his aging body wanted to give. And then came the 87th minute. Tchouaméni won the ball in midfield and immediately looked to launch a counterattack. But his pass was intercepted. Bayern transitioned instantly. The ball was played into Kane, who held it up with his back to goal. Rüdiger stepped up to press, trusting, always trusting, that Tchouaméni would sweep behind him. But Kane's flick was perfect. The ball sailed over Rüdiger's head, dropping perfectly into the path of Musiala, who had timed his run to perfection. Rüdiger turned to chase, his legs pumping, his lungs burning, but Musiala was younger, fresher, faster. The gap widened with each stride. Tchouaméni sprinted back desperately, trying to cover the space Rüdiger had left, but he'd been too high up the pitch after losing possession. He couldn't get there in time. Musiala was through on goal, one-on-one with Courtois. The finish was calm, professional, unstoppable. 2-1 Bayern, aggregate 4-3. The Bernabeu fell silent. Rüdiger stood in the center circle, hands on his hips, chest heaving. He stared at the ground, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. The Bayern players celebrated. Real Madrid's players looked shell-shocked. 3 minutes remained. It wasn't over, but everyone knew it was over. The final whistle came like a mercy killing. Bayern München had eliminated Real Madrid. No final, no trophy, no glory. As the players trudged off the pitch, Rüdiger walked alone. His face was a mask of controlled fury, not at Bayern, not at fate, but at himself, at his body, at the cruel mathematics of age and decline. In the tunnel leading to the dressing rooms, Tchouaméni caught up to him. The young Frenchman's face was flushed with frustration and exhaustion. He'd given everything, but it hadn't been enough. "We needed to be deeper," Tchouaméni said, his voice tight with emotion. "When Kane dropped, we should have—" "Don't!" Rüdiger cut him off. His voice was ice. "Don't tell me what we should have done. I'm not blaming you. I'm saying tactically. You lost the ball," Rüdiger snapped, turning to face him. "Your mistake started the counter. If you don't give the ball away, and if you could still recover like you used to, it wouldn't have mattered." The words exploded out of Tchouaméni before he could stop them. The tunnel went quiet. Other players walking nearby slowed, sensing the confrontation escalating. Rüdiger's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Tchouaméni's chest was heaving, adrenaline and frustration overriding caution. "You heard me. You stepped up like always, but this time you couldn't get back, and it cost us everything. I've been covering for your mistakes all season. You can't cover for me anymore because you can't keep up." Tchouaméni's voice was quieter now, but every word landed like a hammer. And everyone in this dressing room knows it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Rüdiger stared at Tchouaméni with an expression that mixed rage, betrayal, and something deeper, the crushing weight of truth he'd been trying to deny. 2 years, Rüdiger said quietly, his voice shaking. 2 years I taught you how to play this position, how to read the game, how to position yourself, how to be a leader, and this is how you repay me? I'm grateful for everything you taught me, Tchouaméni said, his voice cracking with emotion. But gratitude doesn't change reality. You're not the same player you were when you arrived, and pretending you are just cost us a Champions League final. Rüdiger took a step closer, and for a moment it looked like he might throw a punch, but instead he just shook his head slowly, disgusted. You're not ready to be what this team needs. You're talented, but you're soft. And when it mattered most tonight, you proved it. He turned and walked toward the dressing room, leaving Tchouaméni standing alone in the tunnel, chest heaving, eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. The Real Madrid dressing room was a tomb. Players sat in silence, still wearing their kits, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Ancelotti stood in the center, searching for words that might heal, might explain, might provide some path forward. But before he could speak, Rüdiger entered and went straight to his locker, stripping off his kit with mechanical precision, avoiding all eye contact. Tchouaméni entered moments later. The tension was immediate, visible, toxic. Other players exchanged glances. Modric, the elder statesman, watched carefully, recognizing the fracture forming. The next morning, Spanish media was brutal. Headlines dissected every tactical error, every defensive breakdown. But the locker room whispers were worse. Players had heard the tunnel confrontation. Factions began to form. Veterans who sympathized with Rüdiger's pride. Younger players who agreed with Tchouaméni's harsh assessment. Training on Tuesday was professional, but cold. Rüdiger and Tchouaméni barely spoke. When forced to work together in drills, their communication was clinical, empty of the intuitive understanding that had made them so effective. Ancelotti pulled them both aside after training. His office was quiet, the afternoon sun streaming through windows overlooking Valdebebas. "What happened in that tunnel cannot happen again," Ancelotti said calmly. "I don't care who said what. I don't care who was right. What I care about is that Real Madrid cannot function when our defensive leaders are at war." Rüdiger sat rigidly, jaw clenched. Tchouaméni stared at the floor. "Rüdiger," Ancelotti continued, "you are one of the best defenders I've coached. Your reading of the game is exceptional. Your leadership is invaluable. But football is cruel. It doesn't care about what you were. It only cares about what you are now." Rüdiger's hands tightened into fists. "And Tchouaméni," Ancelotti's voice softened slightly, "you are the future of this team. Your talent is undeniable, but talent without wisdom is just potential, and wisdom often comes from those who have walked the path before you." He let the words sit for a moment before continuing. "You both made mistakes against Bayern, tactical, physical, emotional, but the biggest mistake would be letting this destroy what you've built together. Because next season starts in 3 months, and Real Madrid will need both of you at your best." Neither player responded. "Talk to each other," Ancelotti said, standing up. "Really talk, not as defender and midfielder, as men, because right now you're both carrying weight that's crushing you." He left them alone in his office. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Rüdiger spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I felt it happening all match, every sprint, every turn. My body wasn't responding the way it used to, and I kept pushing, kept trusting I could make up the difference with positioning and experience. But when Musiala went through, he trailed off, unable to finish." Tchouaméni looked up, seeing the vulnerability in Rüdiger's eyes for the first time. "I shouldn't have said what I said in the tunnel," Tchouaméni admitted. "Not like that, not in that moment. You didn't deserve that. But you weren't wrong." Rüdiger's voice was heavy with resignation. "That's what makes it worse. You saw what I've been trying to deny for months. I'm not finished, not yet. But I'm not what I was, and accepting that is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in football." "You're still the best defensive leader I've ever played with," Tchouaméni said quietly. "Even if you've lost a step, your mind is still faster than everyone else on that pitch. The way you read attacks, organize the line, communicate, that doesn't decline with age. But the recovery pace does. The explosive sprint to cover does. And at this level, against players like Musiala and Sané, that half second makes all the difference." They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different, less hostile, more shared. "We have to adapt," Tchouaméni said finally. "The way we play together. I need to sit deeper when you press, cover more ground, take on more of the physical burden. Which means you carry the team, while I become the veteran who's slowing down," Rüdiger said bitterly. "No." Tchouaméni's voice was firm. "It means we evolve. You were the leader when I arrived. You still are. But leadership changes. Maybe now it's less about you covering every blade of grass and more about you teaching me how to do it. Making me better so we both become better." Rüdiger met his eyes. "That's a nice way of saying I need to accept I'm past my peak." "That's a realistic way of saying peaks change," Tchouaméni countered. "You can't play the way you did at 25, but you can play smarter than anyone else at 31, and that's worth something. That's worth everything." The season ended. Summer brought reflection, recovery, and eventually preseason training. When Rüdiger and Tchouaméni returned to Valdebebas, something had shifted. They spoke openly now about positioning, about coverage responsibilities, about how to maximize Rüdiger's reading of the game while minimizing his need for recovery sprints. Tchouaméni sat deeper, covering more ground, allowing Rüdiger to organize from a slightly withdrawn position. It wasn't the same as before, but it worked. In August, during a friendly against Milan, there was a moment. A quick counterattack, a ball over the top, a striker breaking through. Rüdiger stepped up to press, and for a split second, the old fear flickered. Would his body respond fast enough? But before he could turn, Tchouaméni was already there, sweeping behind him with perfect timing, winning the ball cleanly and launching the counter in one smooth motion. As they jogged back into position, Tchouaméni looked at Rüdiger and nodded, no words needed, just understanding. Rüdiger nodded back, and for the first time since that devastating night at the Bernabeu, he smiled. The Champions League semi-final defeat would always hurt. The words spoken in anger in the tunnel would never be fully forgotten, but they had found something more valuable than vindication. They had found evolution. Rüdiger was no longer the defender who could cover every blade of grass with explosive pace. But he had become something arguably more valuable, a cerebral defensive organizer who made everyone around him better through positioning, communication, and the wisdom that only comes from years of elite experience. And Tchouaméni had stopped being just a talented young midfielder. He had become the engine that allowed tactical flexibility, the athlete who could execute the defensive coverage that Rüdiger's mind envisioned. They didn't need to be what they were before. They just needed to be honest about what they were now. The truth hurts, but sometimes the truth is also what sets you free.